Welcome to Give Theory a Chance. We're joined today by Dr. Arturo Baiocchi, Associate Professor at the School of Social Work at Sacramento State and a Faculty Fellow at the Center for Health, Practice, Policy, and Research. Arturo shares his experience leading numerous studies on housing, or lack thereof, and community responses to homelessness. Arturo reflects on taking on such daunting social problems, his excursions into the world of policy and politics, and his recent experience co-producing The Right to Exist, a documentary on Camp Resolution, a self-governed encampment led by unhoused women in Sacramento. Thank you for joining today, Arturo.
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
I'm going to start with a compliment, which is not normally what I do, but I feel like I can't go wrong with a compliment.
Oh, I love compliments.
So we were in the same grad program. We were at the University of Minnesota. I think you were probably 3 cohorts ahead of me, I would guess. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
So we went to grad school with some pretty brilliant people who've gone on to do some exciting things, whether it's in academia or outside of academia. But I'll say that you stand out or stood out as one of the best and most thoughtful communicators of ideas. And so
Oh,
I respected your ability to take a sociological concept, especially in theory, and break it down to be like, all right, what is this actually doing? Why are we thinking about this thing? And not always get caught up in the academic arguments, which can be both an advantage and a detriment to careers, right? When you sometimes simplify the thing. But there's my starting point and one of my motivations for having you on the podcast.
thank you. I appreciate that. Are you saying I dumb down things? Is that what? No.
Yeah, exactly. So today's guest is Arturo. He dumbs down everything, so it'll be great.
This isn't one of the brilliant, high achieving cohorts. No, I appreciate what you're saying, though. Absolutely.
It's funny though. It's funny. It says something about it says something about academia and special theory, where those two things can be interchangeable. So the compliment is you're able to express it in a clear manner, but someone who wants to criticize would say, oh, you're oversimplifying or dumbing it down. So it'll be interesting that could be a question. How do you strike the balance between those two things?
No, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing you're pointing out because I've always loved theory and I love teaching theory, and thinking about theory is fun. It was actually one of the most fun things to do in graduate school is have the space to really have these deep conversations about it. But I think in teaching about theory, I always was struggling with the way it's written. First of all, it's often translated multiple ways. It's not the best effective form of writing, but it forces you to really think through these things. And then when you're thinking about how to convey the essence of a theory, it forces you to put it into your own terms, but also put it into your own context. Like, how would I understand this? How does it apply to my life? And then I find that it's incredibly powerful for doing the kind of work that I do. And, probably unlike other folks that you have had on the podcast, I'm in a very applied field. I'm in a school of social work and not sociology. So a lot of my engagement is with students who are working out in the community. But also a lot of my projects are in the community where I'm kind of talking about theory, but not necessarily explicitly mentioning the theorists, right? Like there's definitely a framework in how I think about social problems and programs, but it is not, I'm not citing a specific theorist when I'm in the community talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's a real value of making those connections, especially if you're talking to an 18-year-old and they're like, why do I have to read this? You're like, well, you can have something that's very theory informed, and it doesn't mean that you're going back to page 35 of your theory textbook and citing whatever Durkheim or whatever. It's like, no, but
that's right.
This shapes the type of questions I'm asking or how I understand the problem.
Yeah. And, like theory informs your way of viewing the world. Yeah. And I just feel like, whether it was like struggling through a quote in Das Kapital or something about Durkheim, like I remember having those like crystallizing moments and like, oh, this is how inequality works. This is why we still have inequality. And it's a good reminder. And then I often find myself kind of talking about this stuff to, community groups all the time.
Yeah. So we're kind of dancing around the thing. What can you tell us about one of the topics that you've actually done some research on or one of the things that you've written about?
Well, so I'm here in California, and the one of the biggest issues that our state is facing is homelessness. And when I moved here to California from Minnesota, and I got this job at the School of Social Work, even though homelessness wasn't necessarily like my primary topic, it became the thing that I do a lot of work on. And my dissertation had some aspects of homelessness related to it, but it really wasn't about why people fall into homelessness, what governments can do about it. But that became the topic that I work in. And as an academic, as a professor, I realized I actually don't have that much time on my hands. And so my teaching, my community service, and my research is all related to why do we have this homeless crisis, and what can we do about it in terms of local programs, but also state level policies. So that's been kind of the space that I've been in. And a number of my projects that we can talk about are dealing with the experience of homelessness here in California, the richest state in the country. And we're going through until recently, California has been doing very well economically. Yeah. And we have one of the lowest rates of unemployment. Our GDP, it outpaces all the other states. We recovered from the 2008 financial crisis much faster than other states, but we had this enormous homeless crisis that emerged at the exact same time. And the paradox of why do we have so much homelessness when the state seems to be doing so well is the thing that like theory helps me talk about to various audiences. Like, hey, yeah, the cost of living is exploding, and our economy serves a certain segment of the population very well, but another segment of the population gets left out, and they struggle in that. And so, what does that mean in the current environment?
As you were, in a sense, you have a topic where the topic almost answers this next question, but there's still always the question we have to ask ourselves. Doing research takes a lot of time, and you're going to be devoting yourself to this thing for many years, and you have been devoted to this question for many years. How did you know that that was the thing that you thought was worth studying, or that was the question worth trying to answer?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's funny. I was working with a graduate student recently, and they said, "How did you know that you were passionate about homelessness?" And I am not passionate about homelessness per se. It's not like it was like, oh, I need to know this. And in graduate school, I was always searching for what is that thing I'm really interested in. And I think I came to the conclusion that I can actually be interested in many different things, but I like to be as useful as possible. And homelessness seems like an intractable problem that has no easy solutions. Yeah. And what better way to apply all of this technical knowledge I have about research and theory to a hard, challenging problem that I can keep the conversation alive about why we have homelessness, but also help people think maybe new ideas of how to address the problem. And so it seemed like, hey, this is what an academic in my position should be doing. And ideally, somebody who has tenure, I can say things and raise issues in my local community about homelessness all the time because that's what I study. And that's kind of why I work on this, Kyle, because I know we're not actually going to solve this in probably my lifetime. And
you could say that you could give that as a reason not to work on it, though. So it's interesting because you're saying the fact that it's so big, that it's so daunting, that I know a single person can only do so much. You're like, I should study that. I can imagine you say, I need to run away and find something much smaller. So that the daunting aspect was an incentive rather than a deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, I teach first year master students in the social program, and one of the conversations I have with them early on, I say, what's a social problem that you want to work on? And students will say things like domestic violence or working with refugees or behavioral health problems in schools. And I say, okay, that's great. How long do you think this problem has existed? 5 years, 10 years, 100 years? Well, okay. How long do you think this problem will continue to exist? 5 years, 10 years, your lifetime? Yeah. What if we say you work on this issue your entire life and you can only move the needle a little bit? Would you want to be part of that? If this problem could be resolved in, say, in 2 lifetimes, would you be wanting to be part of that movement? And are you okay working on something that you're not going to be famous for? You're not
Yeah.
going to be the person who solves it. Is there a possibility that the world wasn't waiting for you to be born to solve this issue? And are you okay not being that important, but
Yeah.
nonetheless working on something that is? And if the answer is yes, you should be a social worker. If the answer is no, and you're looking for like solving
Yeah.
problems tomorrow, you shouldn't be a social worker. And that is something that both like does depress maybe like 10% of my students, but 90% of my students go, yeah, like I actually want to help and contribute to something, even if it's hard. And that is the essence of working in the community. It's like you're not looking to solve this overnight, but you want to be part of something positive that's moving towards something, even if it's moving the needle. And I feel like my work, I'm not solving homelessness. I don't have the key insights
Yeah.
to solve it, but I hope that my research is generating some positivity in the community, that it's helping people in some way.
Considering the scope of the problem and considering what you're saying about you're not going to solve it, but maybe you can shape how maybe you can shape how one city sees the thing, and maybe they try out some sort of new approach. Um, how do you go about researching something like that that's so big and has such a long history that extends both behind us and then such a long future that extends ahead of us? How do you decide where to start?
Well, for me, it's been the community kind of reaching out to me. So, to be honest with you, because I was teaching a homeless class, my first day as a professor, I got a phone call from an agency saying, "Hey, we're struggling with this issue, and the community feels like the more services that we provide to people experiencing homelessness, the more that we're attracting people to come into our city. Is this true? Is it true that we're a magnet?" And I said, well, that's interesting. Let's do a research project on that. And
That's nice.
I had
Someone called you and said, "Here's your research question." Okay, so
yeah,
all right, so that's one way. So if you're a student trying to figure out what to research, just wait for that phone call, and someone will say,
exactly. But also go, how going to the community and going, what is something that they're struggling with
hmm
and could use some insight and better understanding, and knowing that you're not necessarily going to solve it, but what information could be useful for them. And for this community member, it was, hey, could you collect a survey at a Greyhound station and see how many people in the course of a month are experiencing homelessness and how many of them are going to stay here in Sacramento. And so I had a student who wrote a thesis about people who travel by bus, and he interviewed a couple guys that, yeah, were traveling through town, and we kind of figured out their story. And then we situated that in the broader research literature of like, well, what do we know about people who move from one city to the next? And it turns out, actually, the majority of people experiencing homelessness in the community are from their community. And you're more likely to be from your own community if you're experiencing homelessness than if you're not homeless. Because, especially in California, most people who live in an apartment or homes were not from Sacramento or not from California. And so it actually, your transience is actually higher as a housed person than a person who's experiencing homelessness, because you don't have the resources to travel around mainly. Um, but there is a group of people, and I know that you're in geography, so I found some geographers who did study folks, and there are some people who do move to other areas as a way of coping with their current situation. So it's not a complete myth, but we collected some data and kind of presented it to the community. And then from that, I got invited to do lots of other projects. And all of these projects, Kyle, there was always like, this is what we want to know. And I always had to go, how can I also answer some interesting sociological questions to the side of it, and then bring that to the table as like a gift.
so they would give you,
And
they'd imagine, can you collect this data for us and answer a very straightforward empirical question? And so you both want to do that, but also think about larger social processes, or like, how can I frame it to make it more interesting for you as well?
exactly, exactly. And then bring it into people. So for this project, we ended up talking about like life course theories about when people are more transient during their life versus not. why people without disabilities are more transient than not. So also some theories of marginalization, and also just this perception of always viewing people who are. When do we view people as outsiders?
Yeah.
And our sense of community and how we ostracize people. So like this paper that we did and presented it to the community had a lot of implicit sociological theories underneath the hood of it, and it was the most interesting conversations we had was about that, not actually about the data point itself. And so that's how I've kind of have done a lot of my work. Is a lot of my work honestly is commission work, like it's so somebody paid for that,
Mhm.
and I have figured out a way, I think, to do the work that I want to do, have my students supported, answer the question that they have, but then also bring a lot of theory to the how I frame it and present it back to the community.
So, because I found that so fascinating, can you share another project like that and a finding? I'm just really interested because that's such a clear example of there's a popular narrative about who these people are. We can actually go research and see if that narrative holds up. And I mean, that's the story you hear over and over about cities in California. Well, you see so many people on the street because there's a bunch of people who have chosen to move there, and then that's justification for people saying, "Well, why am I responsible? If they're coming from Colorado, if they're coming from Arizona, if they're coming from New York, then why is it that I have to clean up this problem?" And that's the story you hear over and over and over. And I mean, as someone who doesn't research, I hear that I'm like, "All right, well, that can make some degree of sense, but you can collect data
Yeah,
on
so
that." Yeah.
another project that very similar to that is after this, it kind of builds upon each other. And I got reached out by another organization, said, hey, there's a thing called the homeless point in time count, which every community in the United States does as a kind of federal requirement for funding, is basically go out and count how many people are experiencing homelessness on a single night. And you look at the shelter data, who's using shelters that night, but you also then send people out to collect interviews with people out in the street. And often communities will find a private research firm to actually do that research aspect of it. And they asked me, hey, what do you think about the research that we've done here? And could you do this? And I have never done anything like that before, but I was like, hey, I like to learn. I can figure this out. And they offered me a contract. And for 7 years, I was the one who was doing the point in time count report here in Sacramento. And I realized there were data points that we had to collect, but there was also opportunities to collect new information. And so one of the survey questions we developed is, let's ask people, what was your last address? What was your last zip code? How long have you lived here? And we came up with this finding that 92%. So we interviewed like 600 people in one night. We sent out 1,000 volunteers, and I designed this survey where we asked people, um, how long you've lived here in Sacramento, and 92% of residents, people that we talked to, were from Sacramento. And this got picked up, and people disputed it. So we did it 5 times over 5 years, and every year we got the same results.
Wow.
And then some folks at UCSF, Benioff School of Nursing, did this massive um, survey about experiencing homelessness, and they called me and they said, "Hey, can we use this question?" And I was like, "Sure." And so they got a bunch of press about this finding that most people are actually from the communities in which experience homelessness.
Mhm.
And every time we did this, there was so much pushback. And I realized that doing this type of work, you have to have kind of a tough skin.
Yeah.
And, so I got criticized. And one of the things that I always did is ensure that I had editorial control of what I call the community report. And we would always do this big data dump community report about what are we finding out about this survey. And I would get other academics to write different sections of this report. And so this last time we did it a couple of years ago, we talked about police brutality. Like, how
Mhm.
often do you get harassed by the police? And that was also, and we had some criminologists kind of helping us framing that question. And it was uh, it was an interesting experience going through that, but a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
And at this point, I've kind of moved away from that work because I'm like, I did it for 5, 7 years, and the problem's gotten worse, and we did this, but I feel like we moved the needle,
Yeah.
and the homelessness problem is still worse. But I get called all the time by the local media to talk about like why are the problems getting worse? And I just say the same thing over and over again. I'm like, oh, it's the housing crisis.
Yeah.
And since the administration's changed and the Supreme Court has gone very conservative, the move towards criminalizing these problems has just amped up. And so I feel like this is the time to talk about like, yeah, there's two ways we can deal with homelessness. One is sweeping and criminalizing it as much as we can, and the other way is harder is invest in housing and social programs, and this is what this looks like. So it's a long-winded answer, but like I have found this that's my career, and that's a lot of social workers career, is like looking at very applied problems and providing people the data points, but also some possibilities to think outside of the box of how to make sense of that.
Yeah. I want to actually. I don't know if I want to ask this
Sorry, I
question
know
now.
I'm kind of going off in
No, no, no.
different
That was a really
directions
good
here.
answer, which is why I'm deciding whether or not to ask a potentially difficult question that could derail us. But you start out with it was saying, okay, here's this paradox: California is thriving by so many metrics, and yet so many people just are on the streets. And so, is the answer that the success of the state is what drove the prices up, and therefore there's some people left behind? Is the answer as simple as that in a way?
Yeah, and maybe 10, 15 years ago, there would be some debate in the literature about what is the single contributor to homelessness. But now the literature is pretty clear that it's affordable housing is the single strongest
Yeah.
predictor, and particularly the rental prices. And one chart that I show community members all the time is when I started doing this work, every time I did the report, our numbers got larger and larger and larger and larger. People got really upset.
Yeah.
And I would just show them, look at rents and look at the three communities in California that have had the highest increases in rent in the last 5 years. Those are also the three communities that have the highest explosion of homelessness.
Yeah.
And right now, half of all people experiencing outside unsheltered homelessness are in the state of California. We have, about 200,000 people every single night are sleeping outside, and
I mean,
this is
that's a
seven.
mid-sized American city in itself, just that
Yeah,
population. Yeah.
exactly. That's an entire city of people experiencing homelessness, and there's a researcher at University of Washington who's shown this very clearly. Like, if you look at why one community has increasing numbers and other ones don't, it is just how much has rent increased. That's the number one predictor. What's the state that has the lowest rent or lowest number of homelessness? Mississippi. Also, the one of the poorest states
Yeah.
in the union. And so there is this paradox as the richer you get, and in California, this is particularly the case, is the worse inequality becomes. And we're a very progressive state on the surface, and we do some interesting, cool things. But that inequality prevents people from affording their apartments. And here in Sacramento County, about 40% of renters spend more than 50% of their monthly income on rent. And that means that they're just one, you know, emergency away from experiencing homelessness themselves. And so a lot of what I do, I feel like is kind of reframing and because I saw one of your questions was like, how do I use theory?
Yeah.
I use theory really to set up this kind of structural understanding of homelessness
Oh,
and kind of
you're pulling back and revealing that I send you the questions in advance. This isn't just improvisational answers.
yes, yes,
But yeah, how do you? Because that's one of the points that you made. You're getting asked these very pragmatic questions. Almost yes no questions. Is this happening or is this happening? So how do you draw? How is theory underlying what you're doing?
yeah. It's in the just the very setup of the conversation. And when I do these very public face, like if I'm doing a project for the state or for the county, there is some scrutiny about like, am I an advocate? And I and Kyle, you and I can talk about like, is there any such thing as an objective researcher or not? And subjectivity is a complex thing for social scientists to deal with. But in the political realm, if you're seen as an advocate, you're just seen as like creating research that just fulfills your own
Yeah.
biases. And so I kind of have played as an egghead person in the kind of public sphere, but I make no qualms of the fact that I come from the School of Social Work and I'm a sociologist. So what the questions I'm asking and the setup of the problem reflects my biases, but I'm not biasing the data. And one of the challenges of this work is like we've had a very progressive mayor here in Sacramento before this current one, and he really was investing a lot of money and energy into homelessness, but the problem was getting worse. And he got very angry at me, even though I really like him, and
Yeah.
he was a great politician. Everything he was doing, I really appreciated, but it's beyond him. It's a structural thing that's affecting every community
Hmm.
in California. And I also use theories to talk to people about the fact that in the United States, our social service system is very complex. It's a mixture of private, for-profit, nonprofit, different levels of entity. And that's not how other countries do social services, but that's how we do it here. And as a result of that, our problems are very localized, and we blame the city council for homelessness, even though like they have somewhat of a limited power
Yeah.
on what they can do about it. And the main tools that we have is like, can we send cops there or not send cops there? And like that lack of choices that we have is a byproduct of our system.
Mm.
And so I say these things at city council and this last report where I mentioned we talked about police brutality was the point where people were like, no, Arturo really is too biased. So I have found myself now kind of moving away from playing that objective researcher. And this film that that I'm working on is probably the biggest deviation now, where I'm like focused less on quote unquote doing objective research. And now I am, because I feel like now people see my true stripes, to be completely honest with you. Like I
Okay, I
still
want to hear.
do.
I want to hear about the film because I'm really curious about that project. But when they were saying that you had too much bias, it was because the question you were asking at that point, right? So it wasn't even
Yeah.
necessarily the results to the question. It was you introducing that as saying, if we want to understand the experience of people who do not have homes, who are making do wherever they can, we also have to understand how they interact with public officials, and the public official that they interact with most likely is going to be police. So what are your like that? It was simply asking that question, right? Rather than you saying, you didn't offer some sort of indictment of like you weren't saying we have to defund or we have to do X, Y, and Z. It's just like, just what are the interactions?
That's right. And HUD really emphasized, at least it used to really emphasize kind of a community approach to both collecting this data and providing services. And so part of my contract was to facilitate these, to have an advisory board. And I didn't create this advisory board, but the advisory board was made up of advocates, and their number one issue was, can we talk about police interactions and police brutality? And I took their feedback, and I designed a question that at that time they felt was pretty watered down, because I didn't use the language of police brutality. I just said, hey, do you ever encounter law enforcement?
Mm-hmm.
If you say yes, then we're gonna have a follow-up question. What are those interactions like?
Yeah.
How often are you forced to move? And then I reported that data, and I just said, look, on average, people are asked to move 4 times a month, and they would rather not move. And we reported that,
Yeah.
and I got calls to say, hey, could you remove that from the report? Because it makes law enforcement seem as the bad guys, and that's where I was like, oh no, I'm an academic, and so we're gonna just present that.
Yeah.
And I'm tenured, and
Yeah.
so I'm just going to report this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like my last year doing the count in 2022, and they went now with a kind of a for-profit firm that does it.
Hmm.
And there was even an article yesterday in the SAC-B, because there's a lot of community, I think, resentment that we're using with this for-profit firm, because they've gotten rid of all those questions,
Yeah.
and they're showing that the numbers are going down, and that's actually not the case. And so there's a lot of so there's an article yesterday literally about like, why is Sac State not doing the count anymore. So there's a little bit of validation of like,
Yeah,
well,
that makes you feel. That makes it must make you feel good. Like the public
yeah,
is
I mean,
calling for you to come back.
yeah, it's a little gratifying, and I shouldn't say that in a podcast, but it's true. I was just like, wow, and it was like this was also back to your original question. Like, there is no fame to be doing the homeless count, and you're going to get it from both ends. Like, advocates really were frustrated with me at times because, I didn't include all the questions that they wanted, and city officials and county officials were frustrated with me because I was always saying things are going bad.
Yeah.
But somebody needed to do that, and that's what I thought my job was, and I did it for a couple of years, and that was great. And other people do this all over the country, but what I probably did more than other communities is lean in the theory and the framing of it, and yeah, and it was all about like how can we look at this problem from a different perspective, and we brought in all sorts of theories very implicitly
Hmm.
into the writing of the report. And I think so. Theory doesn't always have to be so explicit,
Hmm.
in my view.
Okay, so you are dressed today almost like a filmmaker. So it makes sense that you're. This seems like you're on the set right now. Um, you're working on a new type of project for you. Your background is not film or documentary,
Yeah.
but you found your way there. So let's maybe give a short introduction to that project, and then I want to ask about some of the lessons we can take away. But I'm really curious, how did you end up behind a camera?
So when I was trying to transitioning out of this project and I had gotten tenure, I was like, I want to do a different type of work. I feel like I did this thing, it was great, and I want to do something that's related to homelessness. And HUD had announced this grant saying we want to fund community-based research where you are doing research with people with lived experience. And there was an interesting encampment here in Sacramento where a group of women had taken over a city parking lot and essentially just squatted it. And the irony is that the city was planning to use this parking lot to be a new tiny home community, and there actually were people living there, and they swept the place, and then they decided it's going to cost too much money to actually do that, so they just closed it down and they put a gate around it, and a group of women broke into it, who were experiencing homelessness. And there's a big parkway here in Sacramento called the American River Parkway, and there's a lot of people who live there, and a lot of women who live there because they can live in hiding. They came out, and a group of about 50 of them just squatted and called the press conference and said, "Hey, we're not leaving."
Wow.
you know, a lot of us have disabilities, and we've been promised these things, and we're just going to stay here. And they made themselves very visible. And the city got so shamed that they actually ended up signing a lease with these women to stay at the parking lot. And the city had these trailers from the COVID pandemic that were meant to be used for like isolation. And they gave the women like 20 trailers to stay. And so it was this like safe parking community. And I thought, wow, this is kind of a cool thing. And I reached out to them and I said, hey, could I do a project? Do a project with you? Got to apply for this grant. I didn't get the grant, but I became involved with the community.
Yeah.
And some filmmakers approached me who were doing a documentary about homelessness in California. And I said, hey, I can help you with that, but you should do some interviews at this camp because it's amazing what these women are achieving. Because part of it too, I was like, here's an example that's really challenging the stigma of homelessness. Lots of people experience homelessness, but like they're people, and you saw this community. It was really beautiful of women doing this thing, and so the filmmakers weren't planning to make it about the camp, but as the drama kind of unfolded, it became about this camp. Because I was kind of influencing things, I asked to be a producer of the documentary because I wanted to have some say on like, hey, let's interview some academics about the housing crisis. Let's talk about the irony that these women are using a failed city site for their
Yeah.
own community. And so the filmmaker started following me as I had brought my students to the camp, and they filmed me during class. I come off as a bit like a aloof person because like The camp is ultimately closed by the city after 2 years, and I'm trying to make sense of what's going on in this drama. And it is kind of a beautiful tragedy of like this thing existed for a little bit of time, and I think it was beautiful, but it also kind of fell apart. And the reason it fell apart is still unknown for many people, but basically our political culture shifted, and the tolerance for this new idea
Yeah.
went away. And I think the film kind of captures that. And so I decided that like, okay, we have a documentary. We're going to try to make this into like a teaching tool. And so this last couple of months, we've been trying um, we've been going through a number of universities. So we actually just came back from UCLA and UC San Diego and Long Beach, where we brought some of the women from the encampment that we still have contact with, and we've been screening it at schools of social work and sociology classes. And so the film's called The Right to Exist. To do a little plug there, and we just signed with a distributor 2 weeks ago. So, Kyle, you should have your library order the film, and we can
That's
come to
awesome.
your school. But we are, yeah, we're trying to like use the film to kind of talk about this challenging topic. It's kind of following along with my other work in some sense of like,
Yeah.
here's a really difficult thing, and that people don't want to look at, but it is kind of beautiful what these women achieved. Um, it's more qualitative
Yeah.
than my other work. And when I read your questions, I was like, I really should be more engaged with the theories of this. But like the theories that I'm thinking about is like theories of community and theories of almost like a feminist take of like what is it about a group of women coming together and caring for one another and also resisting the city. It's There's a social movements aspect of it too, but I'm not a
Mhm.
social movement scholar, so this is a new
Yeah.
terrain for me. All I know is wasn't my plan, and it wasn't the filmmaker's plan, but that's what we created, and we're just gonna go with it and see where
Yeah.
it goes.
It also seems like you're interested. You don't fall into the trap of having the answer be it's more complicated. You both want to embrace it. You do want to embrace the complexity of the thing, but you're also willing to point out, hey, the political winds shifted, and that's a big part of the story. Or you can point to this and say there is something beautiful about that. You're willing to make statements about, which is interesting because you do say you don't want to slip too far into subjectivity, and you still want to be the objective researcher to be taken seriously because you care in part about who the audience is, and that's also like we have to understand who the audience will be when you're giving answers. But that does seem to be a pattern with how you're answering this stuff. You're like you're willing to say something.
Yeah, and I think as academics we're told to be very careful and always like hedge what you're going to say. And I have the worst media training because like reporters, I mean, I do have like a list of like 70 reporters in the area here who are always calling me because I give good quotes because I'm just willing to say things like, oh, it's horrible. What the
Yeah.
city is doing is horrible. And I know that's making me sound more academic, but I feel like, oh, because I did this other work, people see me as more of as an egghead, and so when I say things a little bit off script, and don't just say, "Well, the data is unclear." No, the data is really clear.
Yeah.
This is an outrageous crisis, and we don't have anywhere near the numbers of affordable homes that we need. And the advocates are right about these points. I don't. I try to always kind of link it back to some data source. And I am still, there's things there's an interesting discussion that I have with my students about like being labeled an advocate or not. And I think um, that is not always fully known, I think, in graduate school, like the pros and cons of it. And I do think my career is shifting now where I'm like less caring about being quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote an advocate, but I couldn't have been an advocate before doing the kind of work that I was doing. And that's because I was working for projects with the state and the county. And like, that is a real thing that like you have to be careful with is like, if you want to have that kind of objectivity label, you do have to kind of be careful with what you're saying. But that's the nice thing about our jobs, Kyle, is that we can kind of do whatever we want,
Yeah.
and you don't have to keep doing the same thing. And so I feel like I did a certain type of work for a part of my career, and now I'm doing something different. And it's still related to homelessness. Although I think this might be my last homelessness related topic because I think I need like something else, some another thing that I can talk about that is not so, well, even if it's intractable, but just something different.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, so you've done a lot of this already, and you the way you talk about this is in a sense pushing towards the question I like to end with, which is what are some of the lessons that we can take from this? So, from your experiences doing this type of research, from your experiences interacting with government officials, from shifting to try to tell a different type of story through documentary work, if someone's not going off to be a sociologist, if someone's not going to be, or if someone's not going to be researching this particular type of topic, are there lessons
yeah.
that we can take away from it?
I mean, for me, it's been humbling engaging with so many different groups, and there's a lot of positive intention that people have with issues like homelessness or any other social problems. And you understand that we don't all have to have the exact same viewpoint to be going towards a common solution. And there's advantages from understanding. I understand why the county bureaucrat that I'm engaging with sees a certain thing a certain way because that's the world that they live in and they live within that bureaucracy. And I understand why the city has to do the thing that they're doing. I understand why the advocates are saying what they're saying. And I understand why people with lived experience feel the way that they do. And everybody has an incomplete picture of the reality. And I don't have it the full reality either, but I, my experiences doing that type of work really has made me appreciate like appreciating difference. Like that is an important thing. Like as we don't, none of us have a full grasp of an issue. And so that's been a real humbling thing. Like the more I've studied this issue, the more I realize I don't fully understand it. And so that's, I think, a life lesson. And the other life lesson is like, um, you know, homelessness is an uncomfortable reality to see, and you have a visceral reaction. And going to this camp all the time, like I went through that feeling all the time. Like I'm driving literally into a homeless encampment. I'm taking my son, who's 5 years old. We're gonna go to this homeless because sometimes I would take him to the street, the filming, and but these are just people, you know, and people are complicated and people are layered and people have drama, but they're just like anybody else, and like that kind of continuous contact is important, and like you realize that this is a real these are people with lives that and their stakes are a little bit higher than mine. And you know, before we were recording, we're talking about some of the conflicts we have with friends, and part of it is like it's not just a research topic. These are real relationships that I have, and you know, I do care about these people, um, and like that is really important. Any kind of work that we do, that we have, I think, a real relationship with the problems, quote unquote, and challenges that we talk about.
Can I share one life lesson that I've taken from you from the podcast as well?
Yeah,
I think one of the other things that you show really well is the value of saying yes to opportunities to do research that you think matters. And sometimes in both in getting an undergraduate degree, but also in grad school, you get taught over and over that to be an expert means you've crafted your expertise over years of training and you've read everything on it and only speak once you're ready to fully claim that type of knowledge. And we develop a lot of skills, right? So when you got that call on your phone, you could have said, well, that's not the exact type of thing I'm doing, and there's other people who have probably done this research better. Or when you get calls from the local news and they're saying, hey, can you talk about this issue? It's important. That's one of the outlets that we have, and most of your opportunities have come, it seems like, from saying yeah, and then I'll figure it out, because you have the
yeah,
ability to figure it out. And it's not saying like have false confidence and be the tech CEO who says they can solve every world problem because they made some money through some app, but so not that type of false confidence, but being like, yeah, we have some skills and let's put this to good use, and instead of turning down the opportunity to do so.
that's a I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, and I say part of it, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Like what I really learned in college is how to be a good learner, and like it's about learning something and learning new and learning what I don't know, and being honest to myself, like I don't know how to do this thing, so I'm going to need to learn how to do it.
Mm.
I think I can figure it out, but I need probably time. And absolutely, saying yes to things is an important thing to do, and like just for the experience.
Yeah.
There's challenges of saying yes to too many things,
Mm.
and then that's been the thing that I've had to learn to rebalance, and I can't do everything well. And when this filmmaker approached me, I was like, well, I have 10 other things I'm balancing, and I didn't know that this was going to become the thing, but because it's become the thing, I've had to turn down other things. There's an opportunity cost for sure, but I what has served me well, and without sounding arrogant, is just like, let's see where this goes, and if it feels right, it feels right. And this homeless count stuff that I was talking about, it just stopped feeling right after a while. Where like when they approached me and they say, "Hey, would you help me with this stuff?" Like it just like this presented itself, so I'm gonna go and go for it. And then after a while, I was like, man, everybody seems to be mad at me, regardless of what I say. I think that's good, but I'm not a. What I learned about myself is I'm not. I don't like conflict. Like I don't thrive on it. There's some
Yeah.
people who do thrive on it, and I saw that in the political realm. But like, oh, people are mad at me, and I stood up for what I believed in, but I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I was able to do it. And I think that's a life lesson, is like, learning to do things you're uncomfortable with, and making people sometimes not super happy with you because you believe in the broader goal is important. But yeah, saying yes to opportunity, I would have never learned that had I not done this thing. So I appreciate you saying that, Kyle, because I mean, part of there's sometimes like, wow, why did I do that? That was a lot of time, but I don't really have any regrets. It's, you have one life and you gotta
Yeah.
kind of whatever the opportunities are in your area, you take them up on them.
Well, I think it's a good point to stop. So thank you again for this conversation. This was wonderful.
No, thanks, Kyle. That was fun reliving and talking about these things. So thank you.